The Dakota winds carried Rebecca Miller's cries across the frozen landscape, but there was no one to hear them. Blood pooled beneath her as she clutched the rough-hewn bedpost, her body trembling with exhaustion. Two tiny bundles lay silent in the makeshift cradle, too silent. The life she'd imagined in this frontier outpost had unraveled with each passing minute, leaving nothing but the hollow sound of her husband's retreating footsteps and the merciless howl of winter through the cabin's cracks. This wasn't how their story was supposed to end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca's world had narrowed to the rhythm of her ragged breathing and the slow, steady drip of blood onto the pine floorboards. 18 hours of labor had left her barely conscious, her nightgown soaked through with sweat and crimson stains. The twins had come early, a boy and a girl, their tiny bodies blue-tinged and motionless. She had tried everything she knew, rubbing their chests, breathing into their small mouths, but they remained still as the frozen landscape outside. "Jacob," she had called weakly when she heard the door. "Jacob, please." Her husband stood framed in the doorway, snowflakes melting on his broad shoulders, his face a mask of disappointment rather than grief. The scent of whiskey hung about, him sharp and accusatory. His eyes swept over the scene, the blood, the babies, the broken woman who had promised him sons to work his land. "What have you done, Becky?" His voice was flat, emotionless. He didn't move toward her, didn't rush to comfort or help. He remained planted by the door, as if afraid her failure might be contagious. "They won't cry," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please help me make them cry." Jacob stepped forward then, but only to peer into the cradle. His face hardened as he looked at the twins. Two of them and neither one breathing. "What good are you to me now?" Rebecca tried to stand, to reach for him, but her legs gave way beneath her. She collapsed to the floor, palms slick with her own blood. "They might still live if we warm them proper. Please, Jacob, please help me." But Jacob Miller had not come to the Dakota territory to nurture dead dreams. He had come to build an empire on fertile land with strong sons by his side. His wife's failing body and lifeless babies were just another disappointment in a long string of frontier hardships. "I told you we should have gone to the fort when the pain started," he said, his voice rising. "But no, you insisted you could birth them here like your ma taught you." He kicked at the leg of the table, sending her carefully arranged birthing cloths to the floor. "The storm was too fierce," Rebecca whispered. "We would have died in the snow." "And what difference would that make now?" Jacob's laugh was bitter as the winter air. He moved to the shelf and grabbed the bottle he kept hidden behind the flour sack, taking a long swallow before turning back to her. "I've got nothing now, no sons, a wife who can't even birth living children." Rebecca's fingers crawled toward the cradle, stretching across the rough floorboards. "The girl, I think she moved. Jacob, please look again." But Jacob wasn't listening anymore. He was staring out the window at the endless white, his mind already calculating how quickly he could start over elsewhere. "My brother wrote from California last month, said a man could make his fortune there without freezing to death every winter." A terrible stillness settled over Rebecca's heart. "What are you saying?" Jacob took another long drink, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I'm saying there's nothing for me here, not anymore." "They're your children," Rebecca whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "And I'm your wife." "Children breathe, Becky. They cry and scream and grow. These don't." He gestured dismissively toward the cradle. "And wives give their husbands sons, living sons." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the dying fire. Rebecca dragged herself toward the hearth, leaving a trail of blood behind her. "Help me," she begged. Not for herself now, but for the tiny bodies that hadn't yet been given a chance. If we warm them by the fire. Jacob watched her pathetic crawl without emotion. It's over, Becky. All of it. He moved to the chest at the foot of their bed and pulled out his second shirt, stuffing it into his rucksack along with a few other belongings. What are you doing? Her voice was barely audible now, her strength fading with each passing moment. What I should have done when that charlatan in Clearwater Junction sold us this God-forsaken plot. Jacob pulled on his heavy coat. I'm leaving. Rebecca's world tilted sideways. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything they'd endured together, the journey west, the building of their cabin, the long nights planning their future. You can't leave us here. We'll die. Jacob paused at the door, his hand on the latch. For a moment, something, like regret, flickered across his features. Then his jaw hardened. You're already dying, Becky, and they never lived at all. He opened the door, letting in a gust of snow and bitter cold. The trading post is 10 miles south. If you make it there, maybe someone will take pity on you. Jacob! It was a cry torn from the depths of her soul, primal and desperate. Jacob, please! But the door slammed shut, and the sound of his boots crunching through snow grew fainter, until there was nothing but the wind and her own shallow breathing. Rebecca lay on the floor, the life slowly draining from her body. With the last of her strength, she dragged herself back to the cradle and reached in to touch the tiny faces of her children. To her amazement, one of them, the girl, twitched, slightly under her touch. A breath so faint it was nearly imperceptible moved the tiny chest. "Oh God," Rebecca whispered, her heart surging with desperate hope. She gently lifted the infant, cradling her against her chest, trying to transfer what little warmth remained in her own failing body. "Live," she begged. "Please live." The boy, too, seemed less blue than before. Had she imagined them dead in her exhausted delirium? Or had the brief exposure to the fire brought some spark of life back to their tiny bodies? Rebecca didn't know, and she had no time to question this miracle. If there was any chance her babies might live, she had to find help. The rational part of her knew it was madness to venture into the blizzard in her condition. But staying meant certain death for all three of them. The fire would die within hours, and the temperature would plummet further when night fell. Jacob had taken most of their supplies. There was no choice. With trembling hands, Rebecca wrapped each twin in a scrap of blanket, then bound them to her chest with strips torn from her petticoat. She pulled on Jacob's old coat, which he deemed too worn to take, grateful for its size that allowed room. For the babies against her body. Her legs shook violently as she forced herself to stand, and fresh blood soaked through her nightgown. The journey to the door seemed endless. Each step sent waves of agony through her torn body. But Rebecca focused on the tiny heartbeats against her chest. She had carried these children inside her for months. She would not fail them now. Outside, the world had transformed into a swirling white void. The bitter cold stole her breath, and the wind cut through Jacob's coat like knives. Rebecca stood, for a moment, swaying on the threshold of the cabin that had been her home and her prison. She had no idea which direction to take. Jacob had said south, but in this whiteout, every direction looked the same. Rebecca chose to follow what she thought might be the path they had cleared to the creek, though snow had long since covered any trace of it. Each step was a battle against pain and exhaustion. The snow reached past her knees in places, and her makeshift moccasins, crafted from an old wool blanket, provided little protection from the cold. Just a little further, she whispered to her babies, though she had barely begun. "Mama won't let you go. Mama won't let you die out here." Time lost all meaning in the storm. Rebecca fell countless times, struggling back to her feet with diminishing strength. The twins had begun to make small mewling sounds against her chest, a sign of life that both elated and terrified her. If they were strong enough to cry, they were strong enough to feel the savage bite of winter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The blood trail she left behind was quickly covered by fresh snow. Pain radiated from her core, and dizziness threatened to overwhelm her. Still, Rebecca pushed forward, one agonizing step after another. Her world narrowed to the simple act of movement, another step and another, for her children. She didn't see the ravine until it was too late. The ground simply disappeared beneath her feet, and Rebecca tumbled down a snow-covered embankment, unable to protect herself with her arms. Bound around her precious cargo, sharp rocks tore at her skin through the thin fabric of her nightgown, and a sickening crack accompanied a burst of pain in her ankle. Rebecca came to rest at the bottom, half buried in snow. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then with a gasp she clawed her way to consciousness and immediately felt for the bundles at her chest. The twins were still there, still making their tiny sounds of protest. Somehow, miraculously, they had survived the fall. But Rebecca knew she would not be walking any further. Her ankle was surely broken, and the blood loss had weakened her beyond recovery. As the reality of their situation crashed over her, Rebecca began to weep, not for herself, but for her children who would freeze to death against her cooling body. "I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching them closer. "I'm so sorry, my loves." As darkness began to close in around her vision, Rebecca thought she saw movement in the trees nearby, a figure indistinct through the curtain of snow and her own fading consciousness. Perhaps death had come for them at last, wearing a shape she could comprehend in her final moments. But death didn't take shapes like this. Wrapped in furs, moving with purpose through the storm, kneeling beside her with hands that felt warm against her frozen cheek. "Help!" Rebecca managed, her voice a thread of sound against the howling wind. "Please, my babies." The last thing she saw before consciousness abandoned her entirely was a woman's face. Rich copper skin lined with wisdom, dark eyes filled. With concern, silver-streaked braids framing high cheekbones. The woman's lips moved, but Rebecca couldn't hear the words. The world faded to black, and Rebecca Miller slipped away, certain that whatever came next, she had done everything possible to save her children. The transition from darkness to light wasn't sudden. It came in fragments, a flash of fire glow, the scent of herbs she couldn't name. Gentle hands moving across her body, soft chanting in a language she'd never heard. Rebecca drifted between worlds, tethered to life by the thinnest of threads, pulled back each time by the same question that surfaced through her delirium. "Where are my babies?" Consciousness returned fully with the sensation of something warm pressed against her lips. Rebecca's eyes fluttered open to find a wooden cup held by weathered hands. The liquid that trickled into her mouth was bitter, but not unpleasant, tasting of earth and root and something vaguely sweet. "Drink," said a voice, accented but clear. "You bleed inside. This will help." Rebecca swallowed obediently, her gaze darting around what appeared to be a circular dwelling. It wasn't a cabin like her own, with squared corners and straight walls. This space was round, the walls sloping upward to meet at a central opening, where daylight filtered through, along with a thin column of smoke from the fire pit at the center. Hides and woven blankets lined the structure, and bundles of dried plants hung from poles overhead. And there, in a cradle made of bent willow branches lined with rabbit fur, lay two swaddled bundles. "My babies!" Rebecca gasped, trying to sit up. A wave of dizziness immediately forced her back down. "They live," the woman said simply, setting aside the cup. "The boy was blue when I found you. His spirit was starting to leave. I called it back." She spoke matter-of-factly, as if summoning departing spirits was an everyday occurrence. The girl is stronger. She fights like a young elk. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. They're alive? Truly alive? The woman nodded, her dark eyes studying. Rebecca with an intensity that felt like she was looking beneath skin and bone. "Asham Wachiwi, this is my lodge." "Rebecca Miller," she responded automatically, then with more feeling, "Thank you for saving us." Wachiwi made a dismissive gesture with one hand. "The spirits guided me to you. I only followed." She moved to tend the fire, adding small sticks to the flames with deliberate care. "Your husband, where is he?" The question landed like a physical blow. Rebecca closed her eyes as the memory of Jacob's departure crashed back upon her. "Gone," she whispered. "He thought the babies were dead. He left us all to die." Wachiwi nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Men who leave their families to the winter are lower than coyotes," she said simply. "Even animals protect their young." Rebecca couldn't argue with that assessment. The betrayal was still too raw, too incomprehensible to fully process. Instead, she focused on the miracle before her. "How long have I been here?" "4 days," Wachiwi replied. "The moon has watched over you for 4 nights. I did not know if you would wake again. 4 days." Rebecca tried to absorb this information. 4 days since Jacob had walked out. 4 days since she had collapsed in the snow, certain she was leading her children to their deaths. 4 days in which a stranger had cared for her babies while she hovered between life and death. "The bleeding has slowed," Wachiwi continued, her tone practical. "But your body is weak. The babies need milk and yours has not come." Rebecca felt a fresh wave of anxiety. Of course, her children would starve without milk, and in her weakened state, her body had not produced what they needed. "How have they survived?" "I've been feeding them broth made from deer bone and herbs," Wachiwi explained. "And a young mother in my village who recently lost her own child has shared her milk. They are small, but growing stronger." Relief washed over Rebecca, followed immediately by a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought fresh tears. "I can never repay such kindness." Wachiwi's expression softened slightly. "Among my people, we do not let the innocent suffer when we can prevent it. Your white settlements have strange rules about who deserves help. We do not think this way." There was no judgment in her tone, only a statement of difference. Rebecca found she could not disagree. How many times had she heard settlers speak of those savages while demonstrating far greater cruelty toward their own kind than she had ever witnessed from the native peoples? Can I hold them?" Rebecca asked, desperate to feel her children against her heart again. Wachiwi studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You must stay lying down. Your body is still healing." She moved to the willow cradle and gently lifted one bundle, then the other, placing them carefully on either side of Rebecca. The feeling of their warm, living bodies against her was indescribable. Rebecca unwrapped the blankets slightly to look at their faces, perfect tiny features, rosier than she remembered, free of the blue tinge of death that had haunted her memories. The boy had a dusting of dark hair, while the girl's head was crowned with wisps of auburn that matched Rebecca's own. "Hello, my loves," she whispered, touching each small cheek with trembling fingers. "Your mama is here now. Your mama found help." The girl's eyes opened at the sound of Rebecca's voice, dark blue newborn eyes that would likely change with time, and her tiny mouth worked in what might have been the beginning of a smile or simply a reflex. The boy remained sleeping, his breathing steady and strong, where before it had been non-existent. "Have you named them?" Wachiwi asked, watching the reunion with quiet approval. Rebecca shook her head. "Jacob didn't want to choose names until we were sure they would live. The cruelty of that policy struck her anew. But I had names in my heart. Emma for my mother, and Samuel for my grandfather. Emma, Wachiwi repeated, placing a gentle hand on the girl's head. Samuel. Her hand moved to the boy. Good names, strong spirits. Will they truly be well? Rebecca couldn't keep the fear from her voice. They came so early, and the birth was difficult. Wachiwi sat back on her heels, considering the question seriously. The road ahead is not certain. Small babies face many dangers, but these two have already fought the greatest battle. They have called back their spirits from the Shadowlands. This shows great strength. She adjusted the fur covering Rebecca's legs. Rest now. When you're stronger, you can feed them yourself. Until then, they are in good hands. As if to punctuate this statement, a young woman ducked through the entrance flap of the lodge, bringing with her a gust of cold air and the scent of pine. She carried a bundle of firewood and a small pouch that swung at her hip. Her eyes widened slightly at seeing Rebecca awake. "Ah, Winona," Wachiwi greeted her. "Our guest has returned to us." The younger woman, perhaps no more than 18, nodded respectfully to Rebecca before setting down her burdens. She spoke rapidly to Wachiwi in their native tongue, gesturing occasionally toward the babies. "My sister's daughter," Wachiwi explained to Rebecca. "She helps me gather medicines and has been bringing milk for your little ones." Rebecca tried to convey her gratitude with her eyes, unable to find adequate words. "Thank you," she managed finally, the phrase feeling wholly insufficient. Winona smiled shyly before answering in halting English. "They good babies, not cry." "Much." Rebecca watched as the young woman moved to the fire, adding wood with practiced efficiency. There was a grace to her movements that Rebecca envied, a certainty about her place in the world that Rebecca herself had never possessed, even before Jacob's betrayal had shattered what remained of her confidence. As she lay there, her babies, warm against her sides, Rebecca felt the first stirrings of something unexpected beneath her grief and physical pain. It wasn't happiness. She was still too broken for that. But perhaps it was the beginning of hope. Her children lived. She lived. Whatever came next, this simple fact was miracle enough for now. Wachiwi seemed to sense her thoughts. "The storm has passed," she said, glancing toward the smoke hole where blue sky was now visible. "But winter remains. You will stay until you are strong enough to choose your path." Choose your path. The words resonated deeply with Rebecca. For the first time since marrying Jacob at 17, her path was truly her own to choose. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. "I don't know where to go," she admitted quietly. "The cabin was all we had." Wachiwi nodded, unsurprised. "First you heal, then you decide. The answers will come when your body is no longer fighting to survive." As if on cue, exhaustion washed over Rebecca. The brief interaction had drained what little strength she had regained. Her eyelids grew heavy, even as she fought to keep her gaze on her children's faces. "Sleep," Wachiwi encouraged, gently gathering the twins back into her capable hands. "They will be here when you wake. This is a promise." Rebecca wanted to protest, to keep her babies close, but her body betrayed her. As she drifted back into darkness, the last thing she saw was Wachiwi placing the twins tenderly back in their willow cradle, humming a melody that seemed to weave itself into Rebecca's dreams. A song of protection, of survival, of a path not yet revealed, but waiting to be discovered. Days melded into one another in Wachiwi's lodge, marked only by the shifting patterns of light through the smoke hole and the steady rhythm of care that surrounded Rebecca and her twins. The pain in her body gradually subsided from sharp, breath-stealing agony to a dull, persistent ache. Wachiwi applied poultices of herbs Rebecca couldn't name, changing them with practiced hands that seemed to instinctively know where the worst of the damage lay within her. The twins thrived under the shared care of the Lakota women. Samuel, once so still and blue, now kicked his tiny legs with surprising strength when unwrapped for washing. Emma, the fighter from the beginning, had a keening cry that brought a smile to Wachewe's normally solemn face. "She speaks to the spirits," the medicine woman would say, listening to the infant's wails with approving nods. "She tells them she is here, and they must pay attention." On the 7th day since her awakening, Rebecca managed to sit upright without assistance. The simple achievement felt monumental. She leaned against the willow backrest Winona had crafted for her, watching as Wachewe showed her how to wrap the twins in the traditional Lakota way, snug but not constricting, with their arms free to move. "Your milk will come soon," Wachewe observed, noticing Rebecca wince at the tenderness in her breasts. "The tea is helping. Your body remembers what to do." Rebecca nodded, grateful beyond words. The herbal concoctions Wachewe prepared 3 times daily tasted increasingly less bitter as her palate adjusted. She drank them without complaint, understanding now that each served a specific purpose, one for healing her torn flesh, another for cleansing her blood, a third for bringing her milk. "I never thought they would live," Rebecca confessed quietly, watching Samuel's tiny chest rise and fall in sleep. "When they came so early and so still. I thought the Lord had taken them before they'd had a chance to know the world." Wachewe continued her work, threading sinew through a piece of soft hide that would become moccasins for one of the twins. "Your white man's God is strange to me," she said without judgment. "He seems to take when taking is not necessary and give only when asked with the right words." She tied off a knot with practiced precision. "The spirits of my people are in everything around us, the trees, the stones, the wind. They do not need to be asked to help, they only need to be acknowledged." It was the kind of talk that would have horrified the missionary who had passed through Clearwater Junction last spring, distributing Bibles and warnings about the heathen beliefs of the native tribes. But to Rebecca, lying in a lodge that wasn't her own, her children alive through the intervention of a woman who worshipped differently, the distinction seemed meaningless. "Whatever power guided you to us that day," she said softly, "I thank it with all my heart." Wachewe's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest she came to smiling. "It was not the first time I have found your people lost in the snow. Most do not survive." Her hands stilled on her work. "The land here is not forgiving of ignorance. Your husband should have known better than to send you out in such weather." The mention of Jacob sent a familiar pang through Rebecca's chest, though weaker than before. The betrayal was still raw, but increasingly it was eclipsed by anger. "He didn't expect me to try," she admitted. "He thought I would stay and die quietly in our cabin." Wachewe nodded, unsurprised. "Some men mistake a woman's gentleness for weakness. It is a dangerous error." She returned to her stitching. "The she-wolf is most dangerous when her pups are threatened." The comparison warmed something in Rebecca's core. Yes, she had been like a mother wolf that day, dragging her broken body through the snow to save her children. Not gentle at all, but fierce in a way Jacob had never witnessed, perhaps because he had never given her reason to be. That night, Emma's hungry cries woke Rebecca from a deep sleep. Before she could call out, Winona appeared at her side with the fussing infant. The young woman helped position Emma at Rebecca's breast, and to her astonishment and joy, the tiny mouth latched properly, and Rebecca felt the unfamiliar but instinctive sensation of milk releasing. "She knows you," Winona murmured, adjusting Rebecca's arm to better support the baby's head. Mother and child remember each other, even across the Shadowlands. Tears slipped silently down Rebecca's cheeks as she watched her daughter nurse. This simple, profound connection had nearly been lost forever. "Thank you," she whispered to Winona, to Wachewe, who slept nearby, to whatever spirits or God had preserved this moment for her. When Samuel woke an hour later, he too nursed successfully. His tiny fingers splayed against Rebecca's skin like starfish on shore. The completion of this circle, her body nourishing the children it had created, felt like closing a door that had been left perilously open. As the days passed, Rebecca's strength returned incrementally. She began assisting with small tasks, sorting dried herbs for Wachui, helping prepare the twins' washing water, eventually learning to stitch in the Lakota style under Winona's patient guidance. Her fingers, once skilled at embroidery and quilting, adapted to these new methods with growing confidence. "You learn quickly," Winona observed one afternoon as they worked side by side, Rebecca crafting her first pair of moccasins from deer-hide Wachui had tanned. "Many white women refuse our ways." Rebecca considered this as she pushed the bone needle through the supple leather. "Perhaps they've never had reason to see the wisdom in them," she replied carefully. "I've found that hunger and desperation are powerful teachers," Winona nodded thoughtfully. "My aunt says you have an open spirit. This is rare among your people." The comment pleased Rebecca more than it should have. She had grown to value Wachiwi's good opinion during these weeks of recovery, coming to see the older woman's straightforward manner as refreshing after years of Jacob's veiled criticisms and unpredictable moods. "What will you do when the warm season comes?" Winona asked suddenly, her dark eyes curious but kind. "Will you return to your people at the settlement?" The question caught Rebecca off guard, though she knew she should have been considering her future. The winter had settled into the rhythm of late January, the days still short but gradually lengthening. By April, the trails would clear enough for safe travel, but to where? "I don't know," she admitted. "The cabin belongs to Jacob, though he may not return to it. I have no family left in the east." Her parents had died of influenza 3 years before she and Jacob had set out for the territories, leaving her with no home to return to. "I have no place that is truly mine." Winona's hands stilled on her work. "But you have your children. Where there are children, there can be a home." The simple wisdom of this statement struck Rebecca profoundly. Yes, she had Emma and Samuel. As long as they were with her, she was not without family, not without purpose. The how and where would need to be determined, but the why was clear as the winter sky. That evening, as Wachui prepared their supper, a stew of dried venison and preserved roots that had become familiar and comforting, Rebecca broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "When spring comes," she began carefully, "I will need to find a place for me and the twins." She stared into the cooking fire, gathering her courage. "Is there work in your village that I could do? Something to earn our keep until I can establish something more permanent?" Wachui stirred the pot slowly, her expression giving nothing away. "My people have little use for the skills white women learn," she said finally, "and some would not welcome you, no matter what you could offer." Rebecca's heart sank, though she had expected as much. The tensions between settlers and native tribes were a constant undercurrent in territorial life, with atrocities committed on both sides, feeding a cycle of mistrust and hatred. "However," Wachui continued, surprising her, "there is an old trading post half a day's journey from here, at the place where Swift River meets Pine Creek. The man who runs it, Thompson, is fair-minded for a white man. His wife died 2 winters ago, and he struggles to maintain the post alone." She glanced up at Rebecca. "He might value a woman's help, especially one with young ones that show he can trust her intentions." Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest. "You think he would hire a woman with infants?" Wachui's expression softened slightly. "I trade with him regularly. He respects my remedies and has always dealt honestly. When the snow lessens, we will visit this place, and you can judge for yourself if it would suit." The promise of a plan However tentative, eased something in Rebecca that had been wound tight since the moment Jacob walked out the cabin door. That night, as she nursed the twins before sleep, she allowed herself to imagine a future, modest perhaps, but one where she controlled her own destiny. February brought milder days interspersed with brutal cold snaps. On the gentler mornings, Wachiwi began taking Rebecca outside the lodge for short walks to rebuild her strength. The first time Rebecca stood under the open sky, the vastness of it nearly overwhelmed her. The lodge had been a womb of safety, but now the world beyond beckoned, beautiful and terrifying in its expansiveness. "Breathe," Wachiwi instructed, supporting Rebecca's elbow as she swayed slightly. "Let the wind remember your scent." Rebecca inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp air. The snow-covered landscape stretched before them, pine forest giving way to rolling hills that disappeared into the distance. Here and there, smoke rose from other lodges partially hidden among the trees. The small winter encampment of Wachiwi's extended family group. "It's beautiful," Rebecca murmured, taking in the pristine vista. How different it looked from this perspective than it had the day she'd staggered through it, half dead and desperate. "The land does not judge," Wachiwi replied. "It simply is. We are the ones who bring goodness or pain to it." As they walked slowly along a packed snow trail, Rebecca noticed curious eyes watching from a distance. Children pausing in their play, women glancing up from their work outside neighboring lodges. Few approached, though several offered respectful nods to Wachiwi. "They are cautious of me," Rebecca observed quietly. "They are cautious of change and the troubles it brings," Wachiwi corrected. "Many have lost family to the diseases your people carry, or to the soldiers who protect your settlements. But they also see that I have chosen to help you, and they respect my judgment." One brave child, a boy of perhaps 6, darted forward suddenly, stopping a few feet away to stare openly at Rebecca. His dark eyes were curious rather than hostile, and he clutched something tightly in his mittened hand. Wachiwi spoke to him gently in their language. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward and thrust his hand toward Rebecca. On his palm lay a perfectly formed pine cone, its scales still tightly closed. "For your babies," Wachiwi translated, as Rebecca accepted the gift with a smile. "He says they will need toys when they are bigger." Rebecca knelt carefully, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Thank you," she said, hoping her sincerity would transcend the language barrier. "It's beautiful." The boy beamed, then scampered away to rejoin his playmates, clearly pleased with the exchange. Rebecca tucked the pine cone carefully into the pocket of the fur-lined dress Wachiwi had given her, her first gift from someone outside the medicine woman's immediate family. "Children see with clearer eyes," Wachiwi observed as they continued their slow circuit. "They have not yet learned all the reasons they should fear those who are different." That night, Rebecca placed the pine cone beside her sleeping twins, a small token of the world waiting beyond the lodge walls. For the first time since Jacob's abandonment, she allowed herself to truly consider the future, not just as something to survive, but as something to build with purpose and perhaps even joy. The following weeks fell into a pattern. On fair days, Rebecca would walk the perimeter of the camp, gradually extending her range as her strength returned. The twins accompanied them in a cradle board Winona had crafted, taking turns being strapped to Rebecca's back in the Lakota fashion. Her body, which had seemed irreparably broken in those desperate hours after childbirth, began to remember its former resilience. Inside the lodge, Rebecca learned by watching and doing. Her hands grew skilled at preparing herbs the way Wachiwi taught her, separating leaves from stems, grinding roots with a stone mortar, hanging bundles to dry from the lodge poles. She learned which plants soothed fever, which calmed coughing, which helped wounds heal clean. It was knowledge her mother would have valued Had she lived long enough to see Rebecca become a mother herself? "Your parents?" Wachiwi asked one evening as they drank tea beside the fire, the twins sleeping peacefully nearby. "Tell me of them." Rebecca warmed her hands around the bark cup, remembering. "My father was a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania, a gentle man who loved books and poetry. My mother kept an herb garden and made remedies for our neighbors." She smiled faintly at the memory. "She would have appreciated your knowledge. She always said the old ways of healing were being forgotten too quickly. And how did you come to marry a man who would leave his family to die in the snow?" The question was direct, without accusation, simply seeking understanding. Rebecca stared into the fire, searching for an answer that made sense even to herself. "After my parents died, I had few options. I was 18, with no brothers or sisters. No inheritance beyond our small house. Jacob was passing through town, recruiting families to settle in the Dakota territory. He spoke so convincingly of the life we could build." She shook her head at her own naivety. "He was handsome and sure of himself, and I was alone, and afraid of remaining so." Wachiwi nodded slowly. "Fear makes poor choices seem reasonable. He wasn't always cruel," Rebecca felt compelled to add, though she wasn't sure why she defended him. "The journey west was difficult. We lost most of our supplies crossing a river. The cabin wasn't finished before the first snow fell. Nothing was as easy as he had imagined." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. Disappointment changed him, or perhaps revealed what was always there beneath the surface. "Men often wear many faces," Wachiwi agreed. "The face they show when hunting, when trading, when courting a woman. But the true face is the one they wear when the storm comes, and there is no one to impress." She set her empty cup aside. "You have seen your husband's storm face. Remember it." The advice settled into Rebecca's heart, a warning she would carry forward. Jacob's betrayal had shattered her world, but it had also freed her from a union that had brought more sorrow than joy. Never again would she bind herself to someone whose true nature remained hidden. As February gave way to March, the twins grew plump and vigorous. Emma, always the more vocal of the pair, developed a laugh that brightened even the dreariest days. Samuel, quieter but equally determined, learned to roll from his back to his stomach, stunning Rebecca with the milestone she had feared he might never reach. "They are strong," Wachiwi pronounced one morning as she examined the babies with practiced hands. "The boy's lungs are clear now. The girl has the stronger spirit, but he has the stronger body. Together, they will balance each other." The assessment filled Rebecca with relief and pride. Her children were thriving despite their precarious entry into the world. Whatever uncertain future awaited them, they were beginning it with strength. On a surprisingly mild day in mid-March, Wachiwi announced it was time to visit the trading post she had mentioned. "The path is clear enough now," she explained, as she packed a bundle of dried herbs and small pouches of remedies. "Thompson will have news of the settlements and perhaps word of your husband's whereabouts." Rebecca felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of venturing so far from the safety of the lodge. The twins were nearly 2 months old now, still tiny but robust, enough for the journey if well wrapped. More concerning was the thought of encountering other settlers, people who might judge her for living among the Lakota, or worse, who might know Jacob and carry word of her survival back to him. "Must we?" she asked, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. Wachiwi regarded her steadily. "You cannot hide forever, little wolf. The world outside will not disappear because you fear it." The gentle rebuke straightened Rebecca's spine. Wachiwi was right. If she intended to build a new life for herself and her children, she would need to step beyond the protected circle of the medicine woman's care eventually. Better to do so with Wachiwi beside her than alone. They set out at dawn, the twins secured in their cradle boards and bundled against the morning chill. Rebecca wore clothes Winona had helped her adapt, a practical blend of her own settler garments and Lakota-made additions. Sturdy moccasins replaced her disintegrating boots, and a fur-lined capote covered her calico dress. With her hair braided simply down her back and a woolen scarf wrapped around her head, she presented a curious fusion of cultures. The journey to Thompson's trading post took most of the morning. They followed game trails through snow-patched forest, crossed a half-frozen stream on stones Wachowee knew by heart, and finally emerged from the trees to see a substantial log structure situated at the confluence of two waterways. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, and several horses stomped in a corral to one side. Rebecca hesitated at the tree line, her heart suddenly racing. This would be her first encounter with her own kind since Jacob's abandonment. What if they scorned her? What if they tried to separate her from Wachowee, insisting she return to Clearwater Junction or another settlement? "Come," Wachowee said simply, not slowing her pace. "Thompson is a fair man. He will not harm you." Drawing a deep breath, Rebecca adjusted Samuel's cradle board on her back and followed the medicine woman into the clearing. As they approached the trading post, the door swung open and a burly man stepped onto the porch. He was perhaps 50, with a silver-streaked beard and the weathered complexion of someone who spent much of his life outdoors. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of them. "Wachowee," he greeted, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Early in the season for you, isn't it?" His gaze shifted to Rebecca and the infant, visible in the carrier she wore on her front. "You've brought company, I see." "Thompson," Wachowee replied with a dignified nod. "This is Rebecca Miller. She and her little ones need shelter among honest people." Henry Thompson's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in the full picture. Rebecca with her strange blend of settler and Lakota garb, the twins in their native-style carriers, the evident trust between the white woman and the medicine woman. "Well, now," he said finally, "this looks like a story worth hearing. Come in, both of you. The weather's still fickle this time of year." The interior of the trading post was warmer than Rebecca had expected, heated by a substantial stone fireplace. At one end, the main room served as both store and living quarters, with goods arranged on rough shelves and tables, bolts of fabric, tools, preserved foods, ammunition, and sundry household items a frontier family might need. A curtained doorway at the back presumably led to private quarters. "Sit," Thompson invited, gesturing to a small table near the fire. "I've coffee brewing, if you've a taste for it." The familiar aroma made Rebecca's throat tighten unexpectedly. Such a small thing, coffee. Yet it represented the life she had left behind, the ordinary comforts of her own culture. "Yes, please," she managed, carefully removing Emma's carrier while Wachowee helped her extract Samuel from his position on her back. Thompson watched with undisguised curiosity as the twins were settled on a folded blanket near the fire. "Twins, is it? Don't see that often out here, handsome little ones." He poured coffee into tin cups and set them on the table before taking a seat across from them. "Now then, Mrs. Miller, what brings you to my door with Wachowee as your guide? Husband nearby?" The directness of the question was tempered by his matter-of-fact tone. Rebecca glanced at Wachowee, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a steadying breath, she told her story. The difficult birth, Jacob's cruel abandonment, her desperate attempt to find help, and Wachowee's timely intervention. She omitted the most painful details, but the outline was clear enough. Thompson listened without interruption, his expression darkening as the tale unfolded. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "I've known men to do cowardly things on the frontier, but leaving a woman and newborns to die." He didn't complete the thought, but his disgust was evident. "Your husband, Jacob Miller, you said. I don't know the name, but Clearwater Junction isn't my usual trading area." He spoke of California, Rebecca said quietly. He may have headed west. Good riddance if he did, Thompson muttered. He studied her for a moment. So what's your plan now, Mrs. Miller? You looking to reach one of the larger settlements? Fort Pierre, maybe? There'd be women there who could help with the little ones. Rebecca straightened in her chair. Actually, Mr. Thompson, I was hoping to find work, something that would allow me to keep my children with me and earn enough for a modest living. She hesitated, then continued with more confidence than she felt. Wachiwi mentioned you run this post alone since your wife's passing. Perhaps you could use an extra pair of hands. Thompson's surprise was evident, but not dismissive. He stroked his beard thoughtfully, considering her. It's not usual, a woman alone running a trading business, especially not with infants to care for. I'm aware, Rebecca acknowledged, but I'm not afraid of hard work and I learn quickly. I can keep accounts. My father taught me figures. I can sew, cook, clean, and thanks to Wachiwi, I have some knowledge of medicinal plants that might be valuable to your customers. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. The twins are good-natured, and I would ensure they never interfered with business. Thompson's gaze shifted to Wachiwi. You're vouching for her then? The medicine woman nodded once. She has a strong heart and clever hands. She does not break under pressure. Coming from Wachiwi, it was high praise indeed. Thompson stood and walked to the window, looking out at the trading post yard as he considered the proposition. I've been thinking of taking on help, he admitted finally. Post is getting busier each year as more settlers push into the territory. And truth be told, I'm not as young as I once was. He turned back to face them. There's a small cabin out back, was meant to be a storeroom, but it could be fixed up as living quarters. Wouldn't be fancy, but it would be yours, with a door that locks. Hope surged in Rebecca's chest. You'd be willing to give me a chance? On a trial basis, Thompson clarified. 1 month. You help in the store, learn the stock, assist with customers. I'll provide the cabin meals and a small wage. If it works out, we can discuss more permanent arrangements. He glanced at the twins, who were beginning to stir on their blanket. Those two are your priority, understood? When they need you, business comes second. I won't have it said that Henry Thompson worked a mother to the detriment of her babies. The unexpected consideration brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. After Jacob's callousness, such basic humanity felt like extraordinary kindness. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I won't disappoint you. Henry, he corrected. If we're to work together, might as well use Christian names. He nodded to Wachiwi. When would she start? The cabin needs work before it's fit for little ones. 2 weeks, Wachiwi answered. When the moon is full again. That will give time for preparation and for Rebecca to gather her strength fully. The plan was set with that simple exchange. Rebecca would spend 2 more weeks in Wachiwi's lodge, continuing to recover and preparing for this new chapter. Then, at the full moon, she would move to Thompson's trading post and begin building a life of her own making. As they prepared to leave, Thompson disappeared into the back room, returning with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. For the little ones, he said gruffly, handing it to Rebecca, belonged to my Alice. She'd want them to have it. Rebecca carefully unwrapped the gift to find 2 tiny woolen caps, expertly knitted in soft yarn. They're beautiful, she whispered, deeply touched by the unexpected gesture. Thank you. Thompson nodded, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Weather's still unpredictable. Keep their heads warm. He turned to Wachiwi. You'll bring her back at the full moon. I will, the medicine woman confirmed, and I will visit regularly after to ensure all is well. The journey back to Wachiwi's lodge felt different somehow, lighter, infused with purpose. Rebecca carried Emma this time, while Samuel rode on Wachiwi's back, contentedly sleeping in his cradle board. You're pleased with this arrangement? Wachiwi asked as they walked, her keen eyes missing nothing of Rebecca's expression. More than pleased, Rebecca admitted. I never dared hope for such an opportunity. My own place, honest work, a chance to provide for my children independently. She glanced at the medicine woman who had saved not just their lives, but their future. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Wachiwi made a dismissive gesture. You owe me nothing. The spirits guided our paths to cross. What matters is what you do with the life that continues. She adjusted Samuel's carrier with practiced ease. Thompson is a good man, lonely since his wife died. The settlement women don't venture to his post often. It's too remote for their comfort. He will value your presence. And you'll visit. Rebecca couldn't keep the hint of anxiety from her voice. The prospect of continuing without Wachiwi's steady guidance was daunting. I will come when the moon changes each time, Wachiwi promised. And Winona may come more often. She has taken a special liking to your little ones. Her expression softened imperceptibly. You are not being cast out, Rebecca Miller. You are being given wings. The metaphor stayed with Rebecca throughout the journey home and in the days that followed as preparations began for her move to the trading post. Wings. Not the fragile things she had once been, easily broken by Jacob's disappointment and cruelty, but something stronger. Wings capable of carrying her and her children toward a future of her own design. For the first time since that terrible night in the cabin, Rebecca allowed herself to feel something beyond mere survival. It wasn't happiness, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh for that. But perhaps it was the beginning of joy, tentative and tender as the first green shoots breaking through snow-covered ground. The cabin behind Thompson's trading post had been built for storage, not comfort, but as Rebecca stood in its doorway on moving day, she saw not its limitations, but its possibilities. The single room was roughly 15 feet square, with a small stone fireplace on one wall and 2 windows that let in streams of early spring sunlight. The plank floor had been swept clean and the walls freshly chinked with mud and moss to keep out drafts. It's not much, Henry said, setting down the cradle he had carried from the wagon. But the roof doesn't leak and the chimney draws well. It's perfect, Rebecca replied, meaning it. After the vastness of Wachiwi's lodge, the cabin's defined walls felt secure, containable, a space she could truly make her own. The twins, now almost 3 months old, were wrapped snugly in the cradle boards Winona had insisted they keep. They sleep better this way, the young woman had explained as she helped Rebecca pack the few belongings they had accumulated. And it will remind them of their time among our people. Rebecca had accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, understanding it for what it was, a bridge between the 2 worlds her children would inhabit. They might grow up at a trading post run by a white man, but they would always carry the memory of being cherished by Lakota hands during their precarious early days. Wachiwi surveyed the cabin with a critical eye, pointing out places where additional protection against the elements might be needed. The west wall will need more insulation before next winter, she noted. The wind comes hard from that direction when snow flies. Next winter. The simple phrase contained a universe of assumption that Rebecca would still be here, that this arrangement would transform from temporary to permanent, that life would continue with a predictability it had thus far lacked. Rebecca found herself clinging to the medicine woman's certainty like a talisman. Henry had been more generous than promised in preparing the cabin. A small bed with a straw tick mattress stood in one corner, covered with a patchwork quilt that Rebecca suspected had once graced his own home. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves had been mounted on one wall for storage. Most surprising was the addition beside the hearth, a rocking chair with a cushioned seat. Was my wife's, Henry explained, gruffly, catching Rebecca's questioning look. Been sitting unused in my quarters since she passed. Better it serves a purpose for you and the little ones. The gift left Rebecca momentarily speechless. Such a chair was a luxury on the frontier, representing not just comfort, but connection to a more settled, civilized life. "Thank you," she managed finally. "I'll treasure it." Henry nodded, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude, and excused himself to open the trading post for the day. "Take today to settle in," he instructed. "Tomorrow morning will be soon enough to start showing you the workings of the place." As his footsteps receded, Rebecca turned to find Wachiwe watching her with an unreadable expression. "You are content with this choice?" the medicine woman asked. Rebecca gazed around the small cabin, visualizing the life that might unfold within its walls. "Yes," she said simply. "It feels right." Wachiwe nodded, satisfied. From a pouch at her waist, she withdrew a small bundle wrapped in soft buckskin. "Then I have something for your new home." She unwrapped the package to reveal a carved wooden amulet on a leather cord. The design was intricate, a circle containing what appeared to be a stylized tree, with roots extending downward and branches reaching toward tiny stars. "The tree of life," Wachiwe explained, placing it in Rebecca's palm. "Its roots reach into the earth where we all begin, and its branches touch the sky where spirits dwell. It will remind you that life continues, even after great storms." She gestured toward the doorway. "Hang it there to protect all who enter." Rebecca traced the carving with one finger, deeply moved by the symbolism and the gift itself. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "Live well," Wachiwe replied simply. "Raise your children to be strong and kind. That is. Thanks enough." She glanced toward the twins, who were beginning to stir in their cradle boards. "I must return before darkness falls. Remember, when the moon is full again, I will come to see how you fare." The farewell was brief but heartfelt. Rebecca stood in the doorway of her new home, watching as Wachiwe's figure grew smaller with distance, then disappeared into the tree line. A complicated emotion washed over her. Gratitude mingled with apprehension, sorrow at the separation tempered by excitement for what lay ahead. Emma's hungry cry broke the moment of reflection. Life continued, whether one was ready or not. Rebecca hung the amulet beside the door, letting her fingers linger on its polished surface for a moment before turning to tend to her children. That night, after settling the twins in the cradle Henry had provided, Rebecca sat in the rocking chair before the fire and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The small cabin creaked and settled around her, its unfamiliar noises both comforting and strange. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like distant water. Spring was advancing, day by day, bringing new growth and possibilities. For the first time in months, Rebecca Miller fell asleep, not as someone being sheltered, but as someone who had found shelter of her own making. Morning brought the reality of her new position. After nursing the twins and securing them in their cradle boards, propped carefully against the wall where she could see them from the trading post's main room, Rebecca presented herself to Henry for instruction. The trading post was more complex than she had initially realized. Beyond the visible stock on shelves and tables, there were storerooms filled with goods awaiting display, a cellar where perishable items were kept cool, and an attic space packed with seasonal supplies. Henry had a system for everything, though, one more intuitive than organized, requiring Rebecca to listen carefully as he explained where items could be found and how they were priced. "Most trade is done with coin," he explained, showing her the strongbox kept behind the counter. "But many folks, especially those just starting out, will barter with whatever they have. Furs are always welcome, good quality woodwork, preserves if they're well made." He glanced at her. "Use your judgment. If a family looks hungry, I'd rather give credit than see children go without." This unexpected compassion further increased Rebecca's respect for her employer. Henry Thompson might present a gruff exterior to the world, but beneath it beat a heart that understood frontier hardships all too well. "What about the Lakota?" Rebecca asked, thinking of Wachui and her people. "Do they trade here often?" Henry nodded. "Regularly, especially Wachui's family group. They bring medicinal herbs, beautifully tanned hides, sometimes beadwork that fetches good prices from folks heading back east." He gave her a measuring look. "Some customers might take issue with that. You comfortable dealing with Indians after all you've been through?" Rebecca met his gaze squarely. "I owe my life and my children's lives to Wachui's kindness. I would hope any customer who objects might learn from her example." A smile briefly crossed Henry's weathered face. "Well said, Mrs. Miller, though you might want to keep such sentiments subtle around certain types. Army patrols come through occasionally, and they don't always share our appreciation for neighboring tribes." The warning was delivered casually, but Rebecca understood its seriousness. The tenuous peace between settlers and native peoples in the territory could fracture with little provocation. Her position at the trading post would require navigating these complexities with care. That first day, only a handful of customers visited, a trapper exchanging pelts for ammunition and coffee, a young homesteading couple purchasing seeds for spring planting, and a solitary Lakota hunter who nodded respectfully to Rebecca before conducting his business with Henry in a mixture of broken English and hand signals. Each interaction taught Rebecca something valuable. She observed how Henry adjusted his manner slightly for each customer, jovial with the trapper, patient with the young couple, dignified with the Lakota man. The trading post wasn't merely a place of commerce, but a crossroads where different worlds briefly intersected. When the day ended and Henry retreated to his quarters behind the store, Rebecca returned to her cabin with a sense of accomplishment. The twins had been remarkably cooperative, sleeping through much of the day and waking primarily for feedings, which Henry had insisted she take time for without hurry or apology. "Babies won't wait," he'd said practically when she'd tried to delay Emma's mid-morning feeding. "Store will still be here when they're done." The following days established a rhythm. Rebecca rose before dawn to tend to the twins and prepare for the day. By the time Henry unlocked the trading post's front door, she had the fire built, the floors swept, and the counter wiped clean. During quiet periods, she organized stock, updated the rudimentary ledger Henry maintained, or worked on the ever-present mending pile, torn grain sacks, frayed harnesses, and other items customers had left for repair. As her confidence grew, Henry increasingly left her to manage simpler transactions while he handled correspondence with suppliers or tended to the small stable and garden behind the post. To her surprise, Rebecca discovered she had a talent for commerce, remembering customers' needs from previous visits, suggesting additional items that might prove useful, keeping track of inventory with an accuracy that impressed her employer. "You've got a head for business," Henry observed one evening as they tallied the day's receipts. "Better than mine, truth be told. I can haggle with the best of them, but these columns of figures make my eyes cross." Rebecca smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My father believed girls should learn arithmetic as thoroughly as boys. He said an educated woman would never be taken advantage of in business matters." "Wise man, your father," Henry replied, closing the ledger. "You should take over the bookkeeping entirely, free me up for the heavy lifting and supplier meetings." The offer represented a significant expansion of her responsibilities, and Rebecca hoped eventually her compensation. She accepted readily, grateful for the trust it represented. April unfurled across the Dakota territory in a progression of subtle transformations. Snow retreated to shaded hollows and north-facing slopes. Creeks swelled with meltwater, their surfaces flashing silver. In the strengthening sunlight, the first tentative green appeared. Tiny shoots pushing through the sodden earth, buds forming on tree branches, grasses beginning their annual revival. The twins changed too, growing more alert and responsive by the day. Emma developed a particular Fascination with the Tree of Life amulet, her tiny hands reaching for it whenever Rebecca carried her past the doorway. Samuel, quieter but equally observant, would track sunbeams across the cabin floor with solemn concentration. As promised, Wachiwi returned at the full moon. She arrived without fanfare one morning, simply appearing at the trading post door with a bundle of fresh medicinal herbs and dried roots. Henry welcomed her with the respect reserved for valued trading partners, and Rebecca felt a surge of joy at seeing the medicine woman again. "You were well?" Wachiwi asked when they had a moment of privacy in the cabin, her keen eyes assessing Rebecca's appearance and the twins' condition. "Very well," Rebecca confirmed. "The work suits me, and Henry is a fair employer. The twins are thriving." She hesitated, then added more softly, "But I've missed your wisdom." Wachiwi's expression softened imperceptibly. "The distance between us is not great. When you need guidance, look to the natural world around you. The same powers that speak to me will speak to you if you learn to listen." That evening, after Wachiwi had departed with promises to return the following month, Rebecca sat with the twins in the doorway of her cabin, watching the sun set behind the western hills. The medicine woman's words echoed in her mind as she observed the intricate dance of spring's awakening, birds returning to rebuild nests, deer emerging to browse on fresh growth, even insects beginning their seasonal activities. There was wisdom here in this ancient cycle of renewal and persistence. Perhaps Wachiwi was right. Perhaps the guidance Rebecca sought was already surrounding her, if only she could attune herself to its rhythms. As spring advanced into early summer, the trading post grew busier. New settlers arrived, hopeful and naive as Rebecca herself had once been, their wagons loaded with eastern possessions, ill-suited to frontier life. Army patrols stopped more frequently, bringing news of distant conflicts and government policies that made Rebecca uneasy. Lakota families came to trade, some eyeing Rebecca curiously when they realized she could speak a few words of their language, taught by Winona during her convalescence. Through it all, Henry's steady presence anchored the trading post. He seemed to exist outside the tensions that occasionally flared between different groups, maintaining a neutral ground where commerce could proceed regardless of larger conflicts. Rebecca tried to emulate his balanced approach, though she could never achieve his practiced detachment when Lakota traders were treated with suspicion or disrespect by certain settlers. "You can't change people's minds in a day," Henry advised, after one particularly tense exchange involving a cavalry lieutenant who had objected to a Lakota family's presence. "Best to let them see over time that their fears are unfounded. Actions speak louder than lectures." Rebecca knew he was right, but patience came hard when she remembered how differently she might have judged Wachiwi herself, had circumstances not stripped away her preconceptions so completely. The twins continued to thrive, growing plump and increasingly vocal. By midsummer, they were too active for the cradle boards except during naps, preferring to kick and squirm on a blanket where Rebecca could keep an eye on them during slower periods at the post. Henry fashioned them simple toys, wooden rings smooth enough for gumming, cloth balls stuffed with wool, small rattles made from gourds and pebbles. "Never had children of my own," he explained gruffly when Rebecca thanked him for his thoughtfulness. "Alice and I hoped, but it wasn't to be. Nice to have little ones around the place." Rebecca recognized the admission for the rare personal confidence it was. "They're fortunate to have you in their lives," she replied quietly. "Every child needs good men to look up to." Henry cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the sentiment, but she caught the pleased expression that briefly crossed his face before he returned to sorting new inventory. The relationship between them had evolved over the months from employer-employee to something approaching family. not through any dramatic declarations, but through small, accumulated kindnesses and shared tasks. Henry began taking his evening meals in Rebecca's cabin more often than not, bringing contributions to the simple suppers she prepared. In return, she mended his clothes, kept his quarters clean, and provided the conversation he had clearly missed since his wife's passing. It was during one such evening meal in late July that the past Rebecca had been trying to outrun finally caught up with her. They had just finished a simple stew of rabbit and summer vegetables when the trading post bell rang, indicating a customer despite the late hour. Henry rose with a frown, wiping his mouth on a napkin. "Strange time for business," he remarked. "Stay with the little ones. I'll see what's needed." Rebecca nodded, continuing to rock Samuel, who was fussing with the discomfort of a new tooth, pushing through his gums. Emma had already fallen asleep in the cradle, exhausted from an afternoon of determined attempts to roll from her back to her stomach. Through the partially open door, Rebecca could hear Henry's heavy tread crossing to the trading post entrance, followed by the creak of the door opening. The voice that responded to his greeting stopped her heart mid-beat. "Evening. Sorry for the late call. Been traveling since dawn, looking for a woman might have passed through here. My wife, Rebecca Miller, got separated during the winter. Heard tell she might have survived with help from some Indians. Jacob." The voice was unmistakable. The same voice that had ordered her into the snow to die, that had declared their children worthless upon believing them dead. Rebecca's arms tightened instinctively around Samuel, whose whimpering increased in response to her sudden tension. Henry's reply was measured, giving nothing away. "Lot of folks pass through here. Hard to keep track. Where'd you lose her exactly?" "Cabin about 40 miles northeast of here. Had a difficult birthing. I went for help, got caught in the storm, couldn't find my way back for days. By the time I returned, she was gone. Been searching ever since." The lie was delivered with such conviction that Rebecca felt a wave of nausea. This was the story Jacob had concocted to explain her disappearance. Not abandonment, but tragic separation, casting himself as the devoted husband desperately seeking his lost family. "Mighty dedicated, searching all these months," Henry observed, his tone neutral, but carrying an undercurrent Rebecca recognized as skepticism. "She's my wife," Jacob replied, a familiar edge of impatience entering his voice. "The children too, if they lived. A man doesn't just give up on his family." The irony might have made Rebecca laugh if terror hadn't closed her throat. Samuel began to cry in earnest now, sensing her distress. She tried to quiet him, rocking more vigorously and pressing his head gently against her shoulder to muffle the sound. "Well, I'll keep an ear out," Henry was saying. "Might ask around at the settlement up north. Folks there take in strays sometimes. You planning to stay in the area? Got a room at Clearwater Junction for now. Planning to rebuild if I can't find her. Good land up there, just needs a man's touch." "Indeed," Henry replied. "Well, good luck in your search, Mr. Miller. Road back to Clearwater is tricky in the dark. Might want to get started if you aim to arrive before midnight." The hint was clear, and to Rebecca's relief, she heard the trading post door close shortly after. She remained frozen in place, straining to hear Henry's returning footsteps, which paused briefly in the main room before continuing to her cabin. When he stepped through the doorway, his expression was grave. "You heard?" Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the knot of fear in her throat. Henry closed the door firmly and lowered his voice. "He's gone for now, but he'll be back. Men like that don't give up easy, especially when property is involved. And he considers you and those babies his property, sure as anything." "What should I do?" Rebecca whispered, finally finding her voice. "If he finds us here—" "He won't," Henry interrupted firmly. "Not tonight, at least. I sent him off toward Clearwater, and that's a good 3 hours' ride in the dark." He ran, a hand through his thinning hair. "But we need a plan. He's got the law on his side, being your husband. If he demands you return, there's not much official standing against him." The realization sent ice through Rebecca's veins. For all her progress toward independence, in the eyes of the law, she remained Jacob's possession, subject to his authority. Her months of building a new life could be erased with a simple legal claim. "Could we run?" she asked, though the notion of fleeing with 5-month-old twins into the wilderness seemed impossible. "Maybe to Fort Pierre, or further east." Henry shook his head. "Running marks you. Word spreads. Sooner or later he'd find you, and you'd have no support when he did." He paced the small cabin, thinking, "No, we need a different approach, something that changes the story entirely." Samuel had quieted against Rebecca's shoulder, his exhaustion finally overcoming his distress. She laid him gently in the cradle, beside his sister, tucking the light blanket around both of them before turning back to Henry. "What kind of different approach?" Henry stopped pacing, his expression unreadable. "How much do you trust Wachiwi?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. Completely. She saved our lives and the Lakota ways, their understanding of family, of belonging. "Do you trust that as well?" Rebecca considered carefully before answering. During her time with Wachiwi, she had observed how differently the Lakota viewed family bonds, not as ownership, but as mutual responsibility, with the well-being of children paramount above all other concerns. "I do," she said finally. "Their ways are different from ours, but there's wisdom in them." Henry nodded, seeming to reach a decision. "Then I think it's time we consulted the medicine woman. This may require a solution outside the white man's laws." The urgency in his voice spurred Rebecca to action. She gathered a few essential items for the twins, wrapping them securely against the cool night air. Henry, meanwhile, prepared a small wagon, hitching his steadiest horse to the traces and filling the bed with blankets to cushion the journey. "We'll go tonight," he said, as he helped Rebecca settle the twins in the wagon. "Jacob will be headed to Clearwater, so we'll take the river trail south. Wachiwi's summer camp should be about 4 hours' journey if we don't stop." As they set out under the cover of darkness, Rebecca found herself once again fleeing Jacob's shadow, but this time she wasn't alone and desperate. This time, she had allies, strength, and a fierce determination that her children would never know the fear she had experienced in that snow-filled night months earlier. The journey through the night landscape was eerily beautiful. Moonlight silvered the path before them, and nightbirds called from the forest depths. The twins, remarkably, slept peacefully in their nest of blankets, rocked by the wagon's gentle movement. Henry drove with confident familiarity, choosing paths Rebecca would never have discovered on her own. "You know these trails well," she observed, as they forded a shallow stream, the water glimmering like liquid silver around the horse's legs. "Been trading with the Lakota for 15 years, Henry replied, his eyes never leaving the path ahead. "You learn the back ways when you're carrying goods that might tempt less honest folks." He glanced at her briefly. "Alice used to come with me sometimes. She had a gift for languages, learned to speak Lakota better than I ever could. They respected her for it." Rebecca absorbed this new information about the woman whose presence still seemed to inhabit corners of the trading post. "You must miss her terribly." Henry was silent for a long moment. "Every day," he said finally, "but she wouldn't want me dwelling in the past. Alice was always looking forward, planning the next season, the next improvement to the post." His hands tightened on the reins. "She would have liked you, I think. Same practical spirit." The comparison touched Rebecca deeply. "I wish I could have known her." "In a way you do," Henry replied. "The post, the garden out back, the way we treat customers fair regardless of where they come from, that's all Alice's influence. She built more than a business. She built a way of living that respected everyone who crossed our threshold." They traveled in companionable silence after that, each lost in private thoughts as the wagon continued its steady progress southward. The forest gradually thinned, giving way to rolling meadows where the new summer grasses whispered against the wagon wheels. Shortly before dawn, Henry pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from a grove of trees near a bend in the river. "Wachiwi's camp," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We've made good time." As they approached, figures emerged from hide-covered lodges, some reaching for weapons before recognizing Henry's wagon. A young man, barely more than a boy, ran ahead of them into the center of the camp, clearly announcing their arrival. Wachiwi appeared at the entrance of a lodge slightly larger than the others, her silver-streaked braids catching the first light of dawn. Her expression registered surprise, then immediate concern as she took in their unexpected arrival. "Trouble follows," she said as they drew closer, her statement rather than a question. Henry nodded, setting the brake on the wagon. "Jacob Miller has returned, claiming his lost family." The medicine woman's face hardened. "The coyote comes back to the den he abandoned." She gestured for them to follow her into her lodge. "Come, we will make a plan before the sun fully rises." Inside Wachiwi's summer lodge, the air hung heavy with the scent of sage and sweetgrass. The medicine woman stirred the small central fire, coaxing it to life as Rebecca settled the twins on a soft pile of buffalo robes. Dawn light filtered through the smoke hole above, casting a pale glow over the gathered faces. Wachiwi's lined, countenance serious with concentration, Henry's weathered features tight with concern, and Winona, who had joined them silently, her young eyes wide with worry. "Tell me everything," Wachiwi instructed, passing a steaming cup of tea to Rebecca. "Leave nothing out." Rebecca recounted Jacob's appearance at the trading post, his fabricated tale of heroic searching, the implicit threat in his determination. Her voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly around the warm cup. "By law, he can claim us. The children, the cabin, even the wages I've earned, everything would be his." Wachiwi listened without interruption, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. When Rebecca finished, the medicine woman was silent for several moments, as if consulting with unseen presences in the shadows of the lodge. "White man's law is strange," she said finally. "It gives ownership of people to other people like they are horses or blankets." She looked directly at Rebecca. "But there are older laws on this land, laws of the heart and spirit that existed before your people came with their papers and judges." Henry leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "That's why we came to you, Wachiwi. Jacob Miller may have legal claim to Rebecca and the twins, but that claim is built on lies. You know the truth of how he abandoned them. Truth means little when power speaks," Wachiwi observed, her tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "But perhaps we can create a new truth that even your white judges would accept." She turned to Rebecca. "What matters most to you, to be free of this man or to have a secure place for your children?" "Both," Rebecca answered without hesitation. "I want my children to grow up without fear, to never know the kind of man their father truly is, and I want," she faltered, trying to articulate the desire that had grown in her heart during these months of healing. "I want to be my own woman, not someone's possession." Wachiwi nodded, as if confirming something she had already known. "There are two paths before us. The first follows your people's ways, fighting with papers and words in front of men who make judgments. This path is uncertain, as the law favors husbands over wives." She paused, ensuring Rebecca understood the gravity of what came next. "The second path is older. It would require great courage from you and commitment from others here." "What is this second path?" Henry asked, his expression guarded yet hopeful. Wachiwi gestured toward the sleeping twins. "In my people's way, children belong not just to their birth parents, but to the community that raises them. A man who abandons his children loses his right to them. The community may choose new protectors for those children. Her gaze shifted to Rebecca. Our council of elders could declare Jacob Miller dead to his children by his own actions. They could recognize you as their sole parent, with the right to choose who shares in their upbringing. Would such a declaration mean anything to white authorities? Rebecca asked, hope warring with skepticism in her voice. By itself, no, Wachiwi admitted. But combined with other measures, it creates a foundation. She looked at Henry thoughtfully. The trading post owner is respected in your world. His word carries weight. Henry straightened, understanding dawning in his eyes. An affidavit. I could provide sworn testimony about Jacob's abandonment based on what Rebecca has told me. He frowned slightly, but it would be considered hearsay in a proper court. My statement alone wouldn't outweigh a husband's rights. Then we need more, Wachiwi said simply. More voices, more witnesses, more strength. She turned to Winona, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. The younger woman nodded and slipped out of the lodge into the brightening day. Rebecca cradled her tea, trying to process the conversation swirling around her. What exactly are you suggesting, Wachiwi? The medicine woman's expression softened, compassion tempering her practical nature. I am suggesting that we create a shield around you and the little ones. A shield made of many hands joined together. Jacob Miller is one man with one voice. He should not outweigh the many who know his true nature. As the day progressed, Wachiwi's plan took shape with a clarity that both amazed and humbled Rebecca. Messengers were dispatched to neighboring camps and to sympathetic settlers in the region. A council was called for that evening, not just of Lakota elders, but of anyone willing to stand witness to the truth. Rest now, Wachiwi instructed, as the activity around the camp intensified. Tonight will require your strength. Rebecca tried to heed this advice, lying beside her sleeping twins in the cool shade of the lodge, but her mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if Jacob tracked them here? What if Wachiwi's plan failed, and the law still demanded she return to him? What if... You're thinking too loudly, Henry observed, ducking through the lodge entrance with a small bundle in his arms. He sat beside her, unwrapping what proved to be fresh bread and dried berries. Thought you might need something to sustain you. Rebecca accepted the offering gratefully, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. Thank you. For this, and for everything else. She glanced toward the lodge entrance, where sounds of preparation echoed from the camp beyond. Do you think this will work? Truly? Henry chewed thoughtfully before answering. This theological perspective seemed to resonate with several settlers, who nodded their agreement. Next, the cavalry lieutenant rose somewhat stiffly. I represent no official capacity here, he began, clearly uncomfortable, but determined. But I've seen what happens to women and children left unprotected in this territory. No decree from any court can undo the betrayal Mrs. Miller and her infants suffered. He cleared his throat. If called upon, I would testify that in my professional opinion, returning these children to a man who abandoned them would constitute endangerment. One by one, others spoke, sharing perspectives, offering support, some pledging to provide written statements regarding Rebecca's character and capabilities as a mother and businesswoman. The trapper recounted finding tracks in the snow months earlier that matched Rebecca's desperate journey from the cabin, validating her account of events. The homesteading couple spoke of how she had helped them select appropriate supplies for their first winter, potentially saving their lives through her practical knowledge. Through it all, Rebecca sat in silence, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. This gathering, this impossible council of people who should have been at odds, was uniting around one simple truth. A family deserved protection from the man who had nearly destroyed it. When the testimonials concluded, Wachiwi stepped into the center of the circle. "We have heard many voices from many traditions," she said, her accented English clear and resonant. "Now we must decide. Do we recognize Rebecca Miller as the sole parent of these children, with the right to determine their future? Do we pledge to support this recognition with our voices, our written words, our influence where we have it?" The response was immediate and unanimous, a chorus of agreement that transcended language and culture. The Lakota elder raised his hands, and silence fell once more. "So it is decided," he proclaimed. "By the ancient ways of our people and the conscience of all gathered here, Rebecca Miller and her children are under our protection. Any who would harm them or separate them must answer to all of us." A document was produced, prepared earlier, by Henry, who had clearly anticipated this outcome. Written in formal legal language, it declared Jacob Miller's abandonment of his family and the community's recognition of Rebecca as sole guardian of the twins. One by one, those who could write signed their names. Those who couldn't pressed inked thumbprints to the paper. The missionary women notarized the document, lending it additional legitimacy in legal circles. When the signing concluded, Wachiwi stepped forward again, now carrying two small objects in her hands. She approached Rebecca and gently placed them on the blankets wrapping each twin. Tiny amulet bags made of finely tanned hide, decorated with beadwork and containing what Rebecca knew must be protective herbs and tokens. "These mark them as children of two worlds, under the protection of both," Wachiwi explained. "No matter where their path leads, they will carry this night with them." The formal council concluded with shared food and quieter conversations around the fire. Rebecca found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many offering practical assistance, promises of trade, offers of childcare when needed, pledges to spread word of Jacob's true actions to counteract whatever tale he might spin. As the gathering dispersed and the night deepened, Rebecca returned to Wachiwi's lodge with the now sleeping twins. Henry followed, carrying the signed document carefully. "It's not a court order," he acknowledged, re-rolling the parchment and securing it with a leather tie. "But it's powerful testimony. If Jacob challenges your custody, this represents dozens of respected witnesses willing to speak against him." He placed the document in Rebecca's hands. "Keep it safe. With luck, you'll never need it." "And if luck fails?" Rebecca asked softly, unable to completely dismiss her fears despite the evening's show of support. "Then we face what comes," Henry replied simply. "Together." That single word, together, contained more reassurance than any elaborate legal strategy. Rebecca had started this journey utterly alone, betrayed and abandoned. Now she stood at the center of a community that spanned cultural divides. "You should return to the trading post tomorrow," Wachiwi advised, banking the fire for the night. "Jacob Miller will look for you at your cabin first. By the time he thinks to search more widely, the story of tonight's council will have spread." "Won't that simply provoke him?" Rebecca worried. "If he hears I've turned the community against him, he will hesitate." Wachiwi interrupted confidently. "Men like him are bold only when they believe no one watches. Now many eyes are upon him." She arranged bedding for her guests with practiced efficiency. "Sleep. Morning brings new strength." Despite her lingering concerns, exhaustion claimed Rebecca quickly. She dreamed of the council fire, but in her dream, the flames formed a protective circle around her and the twins, keeping darkness at bay. Dawn broke clear and warm, promising another beautiful summer day. The camp was already active when Rebecca emerged from the lodge, the twins freshly nursed and content in her arms. Preparations for departure were underway, Henry checking the wagon while Winona packed food for their journey. "You will need this," Wachiwi said, approaching with a small leather pouch. Medicine for courage. One pinch in your tea each morning until the moon is full again. Rebecca accepted the gift, touched by the medicine woman's continued care. How can I repay all you've done? Live well, Wachui replied, echoing her words from months earlier. Raise these little ones to walk with open eyes and open hearts. That is payment enough. She touched each twin's cheek gently. They will remember, even if their minds forget. The body carries its own memories. The return journey to the trading post took a different route than their nighttime flight, a more direct path that Henry judged safe in daylight. As they traveled, Rebecca found herself studying the landscape with new awareness, noting medicinal plants Wachui had taught her to recognize, observing how the land changed subtly from river valleys to rolling hills. This territory, once so alien and hostile, had become familiar. Not entirely safe, the frontier would never offer complete security, but knowable, navigable, even beautiful in its wild permanence. The Dakota lands had nearly claimed her life in winter's grasp, but had also offered her rebirth through Wachui's wisdom and the unexpected community that had formed around her family. Midday found them approaching the trading post from the south, the familiar silhouette of the main building appearing as they crested a gentle rise. Rebecca felt a surge of emotion at the sight, not the dread she might have expected, but something closer to determination. This modest establishment had become her domain, a place where she had proven her worth and begun building a future. Smoke, Henry observed suddenly, pointing toward the horizon beyond the trading post. Coming from the direction of Clearwater Junction? Rebecca followed his gaze, noting the dark smudge against the blue sky. Forest fire. Wrong color, Henry replied, his expression grim. That's buildings burning. He urged the horse to a faster pace. Let's get back quickly. Something's happening. They arrived at the trading post to find it undisturbed, but locked, exactly as they had left it the previous evening. Henry quickly secured the horse and wagon behind the building, out of sight from the main road, while Rebecca hurried the twins into her cabin. Stay inside, Henry instructed, retrieving his rifle from beneath the wagon seat. I'll check the post and see. If there's been any trouble, then try to find out what's happening at Clearwater. Rebecca nodded, her earlier confidence wavering slightly at the sight of the weapon. Be careful. Always am, Henry replied with forced lightness. Lock the door behind me. Alone with the twins, Rebecca moved efficiently through the cabin, drawing curtains across the windows and ensuring the rear exit was secured. Emma and Samuel, sensing her tension, became fussy and difficult to settle. She sang to them softly, old lullabies her mother had taught her, while her eyes constantly darted to the windows at any sound. The minutes stretched interminably. Through a gap in the curtains, Rebecca could see the smoke to the north had thickened. Whatever burned at Clearwater Junction was substantial. A sharp knock at the door nearly stopped her heart. Rebecca? It's me, Henry called, his voice low and urgent. She rushed to unbolt the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of him unharmed. The relief evaporated as she noted his expression and the two additional men who stood behind him, both wearing the dust-covered uniforms of cavalry scouts. These men bring news, Henry said grimly, stepping inside and gesturing for the scouts to follow. Best you hear it directly. The older of the two scouts removed his hat, revealing a shock of gray-streaked hair plastered to his scalp with sweat. Ma'am, sorry to intrude. We're riding to all the outlying homesteads and trading posts with a warning. He glanced at his companion, who nodded encouragement. There's been an incident at Clearwater Junction. Bad business. What kind of incident? Rebecca asked, instinctively gathering the twins closer. Began as a dispute at the saloon last night, The scout continued. A settler named Miller got into an argument with some Lakota men who'd come to trade. Words were exchanged about a white woman living among Indians. Miller drew a knife, wounded one of the Lakota before he was subdued. Rebecca's blood ran cold at the mention of Jacob's name. What happened then? Miller was locked up to cool off, but friends broke him out before dawn. They rode to the Lakota camp nearby, looking for this woman Miller claimed was his wife. The scout's weathered face showed genuine regret. Things escalated. Shots were fired. By the time our patrol arrived, 3 Lakota were dead and 2 settlers wounded. The Indian agent couldn't contain the situation. And Clearwater Junction? Henry pressed. The smoke? Lakota retaliation, the younger scout supplied. A band from the northern camps descended at midday. Most settlers fled in time, but they put the town to torch. The commander at Fort Ellis has called all available troops to restore order. Rebecca sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Jacob's obsessive search had ignited violence that would ripple through the entire region. The Lakota who were killed, she managed. Do you know which camp they were from? The scouts exchanged glances. Don't rightly know, ma'am. Not from Wachiwi's group, if that's your concern. Those casualties were from a northern band. Small. Mercy, Rebecca thought, though the relief was tainted by guilt. Men had died because Jacob was hunting her. Homes were burning because of his lies. Miller escaped during the chaos, the older scout continued. Word is he's gathering men to search the territory for his wife and children. That's why we're warning isolated households. If he comes here, he won't find what he's looking for, Henry interrupted firmly. Mrs. Miller is under my employment and protection, with full support of the community council that met last night. He produced the document from the gathering, unrolling it to display the signatures. Any claim Jacob Miller makes has been invalidated by his abandonment and subsequent violent actions. The scout studied the document with evident surprise. This is unusual, the older man observed, but potentially useful. If Miller approaches, this shows clear community consensus against his claims. He handed the parchment back to Henry. Still, I'd advise caution. Men on revenge missions aren't typically swayed by rational arguments. After the scouts departed, continuing their circuit of warnings to outlying areas, Rebecca and Henry sat, in heavy silence, each processing the implications of the news. This changes our position, Henry finally said. Jacob's violence validates everything the council determined about his character, but it also makes him more dangerous. Rebecca nodded, her thoughts racing ahead to possibilities and contingencies. We can't stay here, she concluded, the realization bringing both sadness and certainty. The trading post is too exposed, too well known. He'll come here eventually. We could reach Fort Pierre in 3 days by wagon, Henry suggested. The military presence there would provide some security while this situation resolves. But Rebecca was already shaking her head. A fort would be the first place he'd look after checking here. And I won't spend months or years living under military protection, never knowing when he might appear. She straightened her shoulders, decision crystallizing. We need to disappear more completely. Start fresh somewhere. Jacob would never think to look. You have somewhere in mind? Henry asked, his expression thoughtful. Oregon, Rebecca replied without hesitation. Alice spoke of it once, didn't she? You told me she dreamed of seeing the Pacific one day. Henry's eyebrows rose in surprise. She did at that. Said the trading opportunities out west would make the Dakota territory look like a country store. A smile briefly touched his lips at the memory. Last wagon train of the season leaves Fort Pierre in 2 weeks. Still time to join if we move quickly. We? Rebecca echoed, hope and uncertainty mingling in her voice. Henry met her gaze steadily. This post has been my life for 15 years. Wasn't planning on leaving it. He glanced around at the small cabin that had become Rebecca's domain. At the twins now sleeping peacefully despite the turmoil surrounding them. But places are just places. People, they're what matter in the end. The simple declaration settled over Rebecca like a mantle of protection. You'd come with us? Start. Over in Oregon? Somebody's got to help you establish a new trading post, Henry replied practically, though his eyes conveyed deeper feelings he wasn't yet ready to voice. Besides, Alice would never forgive me if I let you and these little ones face the trail, alone. Rebecca reached across the table, covering his weathered hand with her own. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Henry turned his palm upward, clasping her fingers firmly. We leave at first light. Tomorrow, pack only what can't be replaced. I'll handle the business arrangements. As darkness fell over the trading post that night, Rebecca sat in the rocking chair beside her children's cradle, watching them sleep with their tiny hands curled into fists. The path ahead would be difficult. The Oregon Trail claimed many lives, each year with its countless hazards and hardships. But the path behind her had been equally perilous, and she had survived. More than survived, she reflected. She had found strength she never knew she possessed, formed bonds that transcended cultural boundaries, and created a family not defined by blood, but by choice and commitment. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight through the snow months earlier, the same stars that would guide her westward toward a new beginning, the same stars that Wachiwi had said watched over all people, regardless of their differences. We'll be all right, Rebecca whispered to her sleeping children, a promise and a prayer combined. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The journey west transformed the land around them with each passing mile. Rolling prairies gave way to rugged mountains, rushing rivers, and eventually the lush green valleys of Oregon Territory. 6 months on the trail had changed them too. Rebecca's skin had darkened under the relentless sun, her hands grown calloused, from wagon repairs and campfire cooking. The twins, now toddling on unsteady legs, babbled a peculiar mixture of English and Lakota phrases picked up from Winona, who had surprised everyone by asking to join their westward journey. My spirit calls me to the great water, she had explained simply when appearing at their wagon the morning of departure. Wachiwi, standing beside her niece, had nodded approval. Some must stay to preserve our ways. Others must go to carry them forward. Now, as they crested the final ridge overlooking the settlement of New Prosperity, Rebecca felt a surge of emotion that defied simple categorization. Behind them stretched the ghosts of the past. Jacob's betrayal, the desperate winter flight, the violence that had forced them to flee once more. Before them lay a future unmarked by those shadows. What do you think? Henry asked, drawing the wagon to a halt. The settlement below was modest but thriving, perhaps 50 structures clustered near a river confluence, with fields and orchards spreading outward from the center. It looks, Rebecca searched for the right word. Possible. Henry chuckled, the sound warming her as it always did. Possible. That's a good way to put it. He gestured toward the western horizon, where a thin silver line was just visible beyond distant hills. The Pacific's only 2 days' journey from here. Trading opportunities in all directions. Winona, who sat in the back of the wagon with the twins, pointed toward a small structure set slightly apart from the main settlement. That building empty. Good place for trading post. Her English had improved dramatically during their months on the trail, though she still spoke with the musical cadence of her native tongue. The twins adored her, especially Emma, who had developed a special attachment to the young Lakota woman. The abandoned building proved to be an old mill, solidly constructed, but needing repairs. The settlement's unofficial mayor, a retired shipbuilder named Donovan, seemed almost suspiciously eager to have them occupy it. place has been sitting empty since Peterson gave up and headed to California gold fields, he explained, showing them around the spacious main floor. Community could use a good trading post. Nearest one's 20 miles north, and they charge like highway robbers. Henry inspected the structure with an expert eye, noting needed repairs but clearly impressed by the potential. What's the catch? He asked bluntly. Building this solid, location this good, why offer it to newcomers you know nothing about? Donovan's weathered face creased in a wry smile. News travels, even out here. Word came by the last mail rider about trouble back east. Mentioned a trading post owner named Thompson who'd fled with a widow and twins after some violence at Clearwater Junction. He glanced at Rebecca. Also mentioned the woman's husband was still searching, offering rewards for information. Rebecca's heart constricted. Jacob's still looking? Men like that don't stop easily, Donovan acknowledged, but Oregon Territory's a long way from Dakota, and out here we judge folks by what they do, not what's said about them. He straightened, his expression growing serious. New prosperity was founded by people looking for second chances. Most everyone here has a past they're not eager to revisit. The offer was clear, sanctuary in exchange for contributing to the community. By nightfall, they had struck a deal. The mill would become Thompson's western trading post, with adjacent living quarters for the unusual family unit they had formed. Autumn painted the Oregon landscape in rich golds and reds as they settled into their new home. The trading post took shape under Henry's direction, with Rebecca managing inventory and accounts, while Winona watched over the twins during business hours. The community welcomed them with the practical assistance of frontier neighbors, help raising a new roof, surplus vegetables from successful gardens, a steady stream of curious customers eager to see what goods the new establishment might offer. Rebecca found herself embracing this new life with unexpected joy. The rigid boundaries that had once defined her existence, first as a dutiful daughter, then as Jacob's increasingly fearful wife, had dissolved. Here, she moved freely between roles, businesswoman haggling with suppliers, mother nurturing her, growing children, friend and neighbor, contributing to community endeavors. The twins thrived in this environment of blended cultures and shared care. Samuel, once so fragile, now charged headlong into each day with boundless energy. Emma, always the observer, absorbed languages and customs with remarkable ease, switching effortlessly between Winona's Lakota lullabies and the English rhymes Rebecca taught her. One crisp October evening, as golden light streamed through newly installed windows, Rebecca found Henry sitting alone on the porch steps, staring thoughtfully at the document that had followed them from Dakota Territory. The Community Council's declaration protecting Rebecca and the twins from Jacob's claims. Still worried? She asked softly, settling beside him. Henry refolded the parchment carefully. Cautious, not worried. His kind don't forget easily. But they do move on eventually. Rebecca noted. Donovan says the mail rider mentioned Jacob was last seen heading toward Texas. Apparently, the rewards he offered dried up months ago. Good, Henry nodded, tucking the document into his shirt pocket. Still, we'll keep this safe. Just in case. He hesitated, then added, there's something else I've been meaning to discuss with you. The uncertainty in his voice, so rare from this typically decisive man, caught Rebecca's attention. What is it? Henry gestured toward the thriving trading post, the comfortable living quarters they had established, the garden where Winona was teaching the twins to identify plants in both English and Lakota. All this, what we've built, it's good, but he cleared his throat. It lacks certain formalities that might protect your position should anything happen to me. Rebecca studied his face in the fading light, understanding slowly dawning. Are you proposing a business arrangement, Henry Thompson? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm suggesting that might be a starting point for discussing a more complete arrangement. He met her gaze directly now, one that would make this family we've cobbled together somewhat more official in the eyes of society. The offer hung between them, ripe with possibility. Rebecca considered it thoughtfully, appreciating that Henry had framed it as a practical matter while leaving space for the deeper feelings that had grown between them during their shared journey. "I would need certain assurances," she said finally, matching his practical tone, though her heart beat faster. "The twins would be legally recognized as yours through adoption. Winona's position would be secured as long as she wishes to remain with us. And the business would be equally ours, with my name alongside yours on all documents." "Already had papers drawn up with exactly those provisions," Henry admitted, pulling a folded document from his other pocket. "Just waiting for the right moment to present them." Rebecca laughed then, the sound carrying across the twilight-draped yard. "You were that certain of my answer." "Not certain," Henry corrected, his expression growing serious. "Hopeful. There's a difference." She took his weathered hand in hers, the gesture now familiar and comforting. "Hope has served us well so far." 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon bright with autumn sunshine, the residents of New Prosperity gathered to witness the simple ceremony that formalized what many had already recognized: the creation of a family bound not by conventional beginnings, but by choice, courage, and shared purpose. Rebecca wore a new dress made from fine blue calico, adorned with beadwork Winona had spent weeks crafting. The twins, dressed in matching outfits sewn from the same fabric, scattered wildflower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Henry, unusually solemn in a fresh shirt and polished boots, stumbled slightly over the traditional vows, but spoke with firm conviction when promising to care for Rebecca and her children as his own. As the local magistrate pronounced them husband and wife, Rebecca's thoughts turned briefly to that snow-filled night that had nearly claimed their lives. From that desperate moment, abandoned, bleeding, certain of death, had emerged this improbable new beginning. The path between then and now had been neither straight nor easy, but standing amid friends and neighbors, her children secure and thriving, Rebecca recognized the journey itself as the truest measure of her healing. Later, as lanterns were lit against the gathering dusk and music rose from improvised instruments, Rebecca watched Henry swing Emma in a clumsy dance, while Samuel clung to Winona's skirts, laughing at their antics. The scene captured everything she had once thought forever lost: safety, joy, belonging. "We made it," she whispered to herself, the words both recognition and promise. "We're home." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.